Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dave Velasco, and my presentation is on Jay Wickersham's paper, Jane Jacobs' Critique of Euclidean Zoning, written in 2001. So Jane Jacobs is an activist from the 1960s from the Greenwich Village area of New York who was really advocating against the prominent idea of the time when it comes to designing cities, which is Euclidean zoning. And that's very well characterized by the bottom right image on the screen, in which residential, commercial, and industrial areas are separated from each other and really encourages the use of car rather than walking. So Jane Jacobs is described by Wickersham as three characters. First is the economic libertarian. She believes in the free market and the ability of people and their communities to choose what's best for them. And she's also a sensitive design critic. She was a writer for the Architectural Forum in New York City. And she's also characterized as a democratic populist. And this is best exemplified by her work as an activist in the 1960s in stopping Washington Square Park in Greenwich Village from becoming a highway interchange. So, he goes into detail on these four, but he really breaks down her character as a design critic. And he points to four characteristics that she detailed in a popular book of hers called The Death and Life of Great American Cities that can make or break those cities. So the first one is density, or more accurately, the lack of density. So, what's going on in her time is the development of a lot of suburban neighborhoods, like the ones you see on the left, which to her, are monotonous and don't encourage the types of interactions that she thought are, crucial to making a city feel lively. And what she loved is, the model that you see on the right in her native Greenwich Village, where you have the storefront at the bottom, residences on top. You have very different people living very close to each other. That sort of, encourages an interchange of ideas, as well as, a lot of cultural interchange. And this critique on density also goes to critique certain neighborhoods, such as the Peter Cooper Village or Stuyvesant Town near East Village in Manhattan, that are developed with one architectural style in mind, and really contribute to the monotony and drabness of a neighborhood. The second design critique that she points out in her book is, the lack of mixed uses. Like I said before, she really liked the idea of leaving the storefront at the bottom and residences right on top, maybe an office building right next door. This is all in order to encourage, to encourage a single district having more than a single primary use within its borders, in order to, make it walkable and more lively. So single-use zones, according to her arguments, encourage congestion and diminish safety. This has actually been backed up by research, and something that I can show you to sort of demonstrate this is Wall Street now, or the financial district as a whole, which on the right picture you have it in the 1970s, in which there are no residences, there are no shops open after 7:30 when everyone from work has already gone home, and what you're left with is a quiet, often dangerous place. And you can compare that to the financial district of today, which is now known, to have a lot more residents, as well as cultural centers, government centers, and restaurants and nightlife. So you have this huge interchange of ideas, which is the next point, a cross-fertilization of ideas within a single geographic area that would allow different people to meet. And this could be very well demonstrated by a simple screenshot of Midtown and New York, in which you have Hudson Yards, you have Madison Square Garden, you have the United Nations at the bottom right, and you have just thousands upon thousands of different cultural centers, restaurants, as well as government institutions, and lastly, of course, those huge conglomerates or Fortune 500 companies that contribute so much to the liveliness of Midtown during the day and night, because of all the residences, all the people that live here as well. You can compare this to Orlando, right, in which you can very clearly see the separation of the different parts of the city, and how it really, in comparison, is many parts of the city are inaccessible. While in Midtown, you can reach tens of thousands of people with a 10-minute walk from place to place. Here, you'd be lucky if you'd be able to get the same amount of interaction with people by driving 10 minutes on an interchange. Now, the third design critique that's given by Jane Jacobs is on streets and sidewalks. She really believes that pedestrians should be given priority over the street, and that cars should be subservient to mass transit. And all of this in order, to sort of foster that, tolerance for other people, as well as diversity within the same streets, because you'll live closer to people that before you would not have likely known. And here I got a figure from her book, which really shows how much the dynamism of a city can change simply by splitting a block in two. That's another thing that she advocated for, was creating smaller blocks and more narrow streets in order to encourage people to take different paths, encounter new people, new businesses, as they make their daily commute to work or their daily walk, go on their daily walk to their favorite restaurant. Jacob's last design critique can be summed up with old buildings. She believed that they provided a space for cheap rent, both for shop owners and people trying to live there. In particular, when it comes to shop owners, it allows different types of businesses to thrive. So, for example, bookstores and like ethnic food restaurants are really almost always pop up in these little areas and these little spaces because they are cheaper to rent. And this also encourages immigrants to move into older buildings. It allows a point of access for immigration that's so important to a city like New York. And this is internal and international migration, of course. So in the middle of the essay, Wickersham concludes that Euclidean zoning is not really compatible with Jacob's vision for a city because, in fact, they're polar opposites. Jacob's vision is something in which everybody's literally stacked on top of each other. Everything is so close together. Euclidean zoning is trying to keep people far apart in order for that to somehow, lead to the least amount of interaction and therefore crime and congestion as possible. And he starts going into the history of Euclidean zoning, which was first established after a Supreme Court case in 1926, in which, the justices there said it was constitutional to zone certain areas to be for, certain uses. And that was based on the city of Euclid, Ohio. And this started, coming about. This started being manifesting in cities that had already existed in eminent domain. That was the medium that people used, most prominently by Robert Moses in places like in Manhattan by creating those single-use residential neighborhoods such as Stuyvesant Town, but also by raising down different parts of Queens and Brooklyn and the Bronx in order to build his highways and separate things from each other, make it easier and more accessible to the car. I this sort of gives rise to the SimCity planning sort of thought of cities, in which there is the residential area and then a commercial and an industrial, and each one has their own district and very far apart. You can only take a car to get to work. And there's a taken as given attitude throughout the United States in which this is the way it's always been. Most people don't question it because it's the only thing they've ever been exposed to. And as a result, that's what we're left with for the most part in the United States. And after 1961, especially after the influence of Jane Jacobs's book, there were newfound attempts at addressing the problems that Euclidean zoning had created, and that included many efforts that are now well underway in different urban and progressive parts of the nation. So Wickersham brings in quite a 3 scales of solutions that can be brought in. And the first one is regulation at the scale of the street. So he really looks at a single street and thinks, what can we change here? So at the smallest scale. So he gives 3 examples of successful projects such as Seaside, and 2 examples of Seaside and Mashpee Commons in Massachusetts, which had been, well established by 2001. And what these communities offer are, a very strong sense of community in which, in the case of Seaside, the residences are extremely close, within very close walking distance of the commercial district, or in Mashpee Commons where they're literally just put on top. As you can see, you don't need all that many people in order to establish these kinds of places. In Seaside, Florida, one could estimate that a max of 5,000 people could live in that small screenshot alone and could easily walk to wherever they may need to go. And in Mashpee Commons, it's literally 9 blocks of medium density projects, and which translate to look like the picture on the right, which is doesn't look all too bad. It looks like a nice place to live, nice place to shop, and go out at night. And of course, this also includes the very specific things such as adding bike lanes, putting sidewalk length minimums or sidewalk width minimums, and putting on street parking for to protect pedestrians from passing cars. Now, the second suggestion is the regulation at the scale of the urban district. And, he sums it up by saying that it's all about deregulation at this point. The urban district often, limits certain neighborhoods, autonomy when it comes to zoning. Some neighborhoods want certain things, and the urban district does not allow them to do that certain thing. So urban district could usually be summed up as a citywide government. So government should cut back on regulations on zoning and allow these small neighborhoods to do what they wish, which is more often than you think, choose to build medium density buildings rather than be forced to develop sprawling single family home neighborhoods. And the third perspective that he offers is regulation at the scale of the region, which includes it could be a regional authority such as a county, it could also be a state. Here we have the example of Portland, in which Oregon has given Portland a set amount of land to build in, and will not increase that designated amount of land until it's essentially built up. So since there's a limited amount of land to build on, developers are incentivized essentially to build higher buildings and not build such sprawling developments or suburbs in order to increase the output of their properties. And what you have here, is obviously a map of Portland and their urban growth boundary, which is the technical term for it, and which has allowed Portland to grow rapidly. It's encouraged a lot of migration to Portland, and it's also allowed the city to grow as a more or less walkable urban district that is accessible by both car, by walking, and by transit. And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and these are my sources. Thank you.